Welcome to the LeaderCast podcast, a weekly deep dive into the stories that transformed our guests into leaders worth following. I'm your host, Joe Boyd. If you've been enjoying the podcast, thank you so much for being a listener. One simple thing you can do to help us out is leave a review wherever you listen. Today's guest is Chanda Hinton. She's the founder of the Chanda Center of Health, where she helps a ton of people, and it's rooted in a very significant, painful part of her life. And I think so many of us as leaders deal with the same stuff. Chanda Hinton, welcome to the LeaderCast podcast. Super excited to have you today. Excited to get to know you.
Thank you so much. I'm honored to be here, and thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So for all the folks that don't know you, can you just tell a little bit of what you do today, what you're into?
Absolutely. You already know my name, Chanda Hinton, but I am the executive director of what's known as the Chanda Center for Health in Denver, Colorado. And what we do is we provide integrative healthcare to folks with physical disabilities. And so that's taking a proactive approach to your healthcare, knowing that you live with something that's not going to change. So for example, I have a spinal cord injury. So I know that, with my paralysis, like I'm not going to regain, but I still want to maintain wellness for the sake of having a productive, successful life where I get to participate in life, whether that be work, whether that be social events, whatever that may be. And so our center just allows that opportunity to exist for folks with disabilities through acupuncture, massage, chiropractic, physical therapy, care coordination, behavioral health, dental services, all underneath one roof and at no cost for the individual. And we're a nonprofit, so we provide these services through philanthropic dollars, or we do systemic change. So we'll actually, go to the legislation and change Medicaid law in order to fund these types of services.
Awesome. Great work. And I know you've been at that for a long time as well. Started in 2005. Did I see that correctly?
Yeah. 2005 is when we started the organization. And then in terms of where it all really truly starts, I think that's the interesting question, right? Because being injured at 9 and seeing whether I was born to lead and be kind of an individual that took something upon myself to create an opportunity for others. It's kind of an interesting question to identify, like, where did your leadership come from, right?
Yeah. Well, I definitely want to hear that story as much as I'm sure you tell it all the time, but as much as you're willing to tell. If you wouldn't mind, can you let us know the story of your paralysis and how that all came to be?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I was 9 years old, I was accidentally shot in the back of the neck between C5, C6. And so definitely an accidental situation. Young boy picked up a gun. It discharged, and it severed, as I mentioned, C5, C6. And so from that very moment, I'm C5, C6 quad. So that means that my paralysis is from my armpits down. And, as a little girl, like just you never imagine that, even as an adult. Sometimes I'm even just like, wait a second, like that truly happened, right? Like I was shot when I was 9, right? Like
right.
you don't, that's not usually a narrative that you think is going to be your, story. While it's left me with paralysis, I think some of the biggest particular issues around it is just knowing that I had to navigate the world differently from how I felt, like physically, how I was feeling healthcare wise, navigating the world, like, just realizing that not everything's accessible or available to you. So basically the injury has launched me into a space where, I've had to look at the world in a very different way and take it upon myself to either take charge of certain things and be a strong advocate, or other times too, just realizing like, I don't need to be an advocate.
Do you have direct memories of it, or is it just like you remember things?
Yeah. So as soon as the bullet entered the back of my neck, there was a little bit of a moment where I had a space of, it was either I blacked out or because I remember like leaving my body, and then I remember coming back to my body.
Really?
And during that time, it was very quick, right? And I remember thinking, there was, oh, I'm going to heaven. I'm going to be with my two thoughts. I'm going to heaven to be with my grandma. Like those were the two little things that popped in my head in that moment. And then it was like somebody snapped their fingers and I was back in my body, right? So then I could hear the noise. I could hear the boys scream, and I knew what was going on. Like I knew instantly that I was shot. I knew that the boys were screaming because of it, but they came up to me, and you're typically not supposed to move, but I could tell the stretching in my neck. Even the only thing that I could feel was my face. But I asked him to pick me up and take me out of the chair and put me in the couch, which again, we were all in a moment of trauma. We were in a moment of anxiety. So like doing the things that we probably shouldn't do wasn't the top priority, right? So he had laid me on the couch, and I just remember not having any sort of orientation to space. It felt like as though when he laid me on the couch, like I just sunk through the couch and was laying on this like hard, cold, frozen floor in a way, And so those are the integral kind of like really detailed moments that I experienced, and just being aware of so much around me in that moment. I think for me, I liked that I was able to be a part of that process, because when you look back at it, knowing like, okay, had I blanked out the whole time, or had I had that memory, I think that the memory and me being able to verbalize and talk did create a different situation, because I was able to kind of guide them through their own trauma in that moment, because they were not making the most rash decisions. So I was like telling them like call 911. Like I'm the little girl that's shot, telling them to call 911. And so there's a lot of that has led to who I am today and what I choose to do.
Yeah. I'm just curious, do you get tired of telling that story? Did sometimes you wish you didn't have to? I think I'm asking it as I just asked you to tell it.
No. I think that it's a great question, because for me, it's like I've chose to put myself into a particular situation to where me telling the story is part of what I like. If I'm going to choose to start a nonprofit and choose to like, serve people with disabilities, integrative therapies, like I'm choosing for people to ask me about my story. Right. And so there's that piece of it. Now, believe me though, because I have to still tell that story as it relates to the bigger picture of what's occurring in the world around disability and wellness. Do I get sick of telling it sometimes? Absolutely. Like there are moments when you don't get to choose whether you want to advocate or not. But then there are like, so for example, like if I'm going to go have lunch with a friend and I realize that somebody's not parked in the accessible parking spot in the right way, like in that moment, if I don't feel that, because advocating every day that we have to do with almost everything.
Yeah.
If I don't have the ability to advocate that day, like I'm just going to acknowledge it and be like, well, normally I would go say something, I would say it kind, I would educate, but guess what? I don't feel like I don't have the energy to do that right now. So there's times where it's exhausting, and then there's other times where it's like, I'm just not going to choose it, depending on if I really have the choice to do that. Right.
At what point did you sort of feel like that incident and what happened to you was going to lead to a career or helping others?
I was always a leader, even like, in high school. Right. So, I was on the student council. I was on, so I saw myself as ambition, right? I had ambition, I had drive, I had all of that. But I also feel as though that being able to have ambition and drive, living with a spinal cord injury, which, I think oftentimes what I'll hear from folks is that, you you work just as much as your other coworkers. Um, and it's not because I'm trying to compensate to say, oh, I want to be, like I'm not dismissing the fact that like I have a disability. I just have a very, very hard drive. And sometimes that drive with my disability is a detriment to myself, meaning like, and my healthcare
Yeah.
and how I model it for others, right? Because there are other people with disabilities where it's like, the amount of output and energy and that you do is so significant that sometimes it makes it seem that disability doesn't seem to interrupt your life when we all know that it absolutely does.
Yes.
So, but I do think that that's an interesting part about my leadership and being aware of like how much energy we put into things and how much that's modeled to others.
As you are growing into a leader, any thoughts on, I'm just curious, anything that you maybe particularly stumbled upon that you maybe did well as a leader early on, potentially because of your disability or just who you are, or if you want to go there, any mistakes you made early on?
I think that oftentimes leaders, it's like there's definitely this desire to definitely not micromanage.
Yeah.
But yet also so like balancing that micromanagement with delegation as well as like people having ownership, right?
Yeah.
And so especially when you start an organization when the the core of it is so much based on a very personal situation, meaning like I had very poor health, which is the whole reason why I started this nonprofit. Like I, not only from the injury of being shot, like I was on my deathbed again because of the overutilization of the medical model and getting addicted to opioids and not even knowing that, right? And having to be hospitalized and using medical intervention to save my life, that when I created this, it became such a personal thing that like it was easy for me to put a lot of energy and love into it. So I think that when you have employees and you have team and you're the leader of them, the difference between looking at a position and a job versus a place where you go to work and you have passion and you care about it just as much as the founder or the owner. I mean, those are all those variances that really can affect the way that you lead a team.
Yeah. You kind of quickly mentioned something that I don't think I was aware of. So when you say that we talked about when you were a kid what happened, but then you said that the medical treatment actually was not going well for you, right?
So the injury was one thing, but the true reason why I started the foundation was because when I turned 21, I had chronic pain. I went to my physician. They're like, oh yeah, secondary condition to your spinal cord injury is that chronic pain is one of them. So, this is right, 2003. So, in 03, this is like the peak of the opioid epidemic, right? Where they're, hey, this is like handing it out like candy kind of thing. And so he puts me on Percocet. Well, it's like, we know that that's not the long-term solution, right? Yeah. And so I became very dependent on the opioid. I was bedbound. I got down to 59 pounds. I just wasn't living. And it was because the chronic pain, the opioid use, not doing anything productive or in terms of proactive to my healthcare. So then that's, when I was then hospitalized to basically save my life, that was when they were feeding me intravenously. They had a feeding tube put in. So it was almost like the utilization of not doing any proactive services, but using only a medical model where it's like, okay, here's your wheelchair, sit there, consume a lot of medications, good luck. Like that doesn't work. That's not something that's viable for anyone. And so after I was, saved through medical intervention, the doctor's like, well, go back and do what you were doing before. And I'm like, no, that's just this vicious cycle where I'm going to be here potentially again with the same situation. Yeah. And so that's when the proactive and preventative healthcare model is what my sister, who was doing yoga for many, many years, just said, hey, let's give Chanda's body what it deserves, which means that, it used to move, it used to get blood circulation, lymphatic drainage, like all these things. And so why aren't we giving the body what it deserves and needs in order to be as productive as possible, to like reduce the opioids, reduce the hospitalizations, reduce all the things. And so that was, I'm here talking to you because of the utilization of acupuncture, massage, and chiropractic, and seeing as a vital part of my healthcare and sustaining good healthcare, living with a long-term spinal cord injury.
If I'm doing the math right, that was 2003, and you basically launched your organization in 2005, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So you didn't take much time from figuring out what was working for you to wanting to give it to others, it sounds like.
Yes. Yeah. As soon as I knew that integrative health, because was impactful for me, that's when I was like, how do I get this one to sustain this financially for myself? But then how do we make sure, like, this can't be just a hidden story? We can't be assuming that, there's tons of folks with paralysis all over the country. Like, why are we not talking about the fact that sustaining wellness doesn't happen, or it is happening through such as massage and acupuncture? And so my initial place of going was to connect with the Colorado Medicaid, is saying, hey, like, let's look at why we're not funding these services, but let's also fund it for the sake of ensuring, one, it's going to save our taxpayer dollars a lot of money. Like, if you're thinking all these people with disabilities that are on Medicaid, which most of the folks, there's very few percentage of folks that with long-term disabilities can, have an income to cover all of their medical expenses and all the things that come with it, right? And so that's where we started with Medicaid, because if they were to invest in proactive and preventative health care, which we do now know several years, 20 or 10 years later, 15 years later, we're now seeing that we do have cost effectiveness. Like, people are not going to the ER or taking as much medication. And so it's a benefit. It's a benefit for all.
Yeah. Your leadership stories can, like, all leadership involves leading people through change. I think, I'm pretty sure, even if it's just getting a little better, right? But some leaders, I think, are called, for lack of a better word, to initiate significant change. And it feels like that's part of what you do, for sure. You're changing a system, you're changing laws even. I'm curious about just what you've learned and how change happens, particularly big sort of systemic change, because a lot of folks listening are probably not like in your field, but they are trying to change something. They're trying to change a company culture, or they're trying to change a systemic problem in the world. So just having done the hard work, what comes to your mind when you think of a leader who's trying to initiate a significant change? What sorts of things should they be thinking?
If we're trying to be, more macro about, like, just trying to initiate any sort of change, I think that, multiple voices modeling is very important, in the sense of, because I think that I drove change by using the voices of others. I used change by, I got very strategic about change, in the sense that, so I think that when you're strategic and you're intentional, and have integrity, I think that good leaders have to come with that recipe. I'm mindful of the reality that how I create changes in a way that holds those pieces, that it's for good, it's not for bad, it's for integrity, it's for impact, it's those are all the things. And I think with my team, like, if I'm trying to change the culture here at the Chanda Center with my staff, I lead with kind of a linear collaborative model. I'm not one to have hierarchy. Again, different leaders. I think that there's other people like, there's no way that you could lead without having, those very specific idea. And we have roles. We have a very structural, you know, tier of who reports to who, but buy-in and collaboration doesn't mean that you can't still be a peer of those within you, but still hold a very supervisor role to them. And I think that not everyone's good at that, and some people are really great at that.
Yeah. I'm curious, as we're unfortunately running out of time. It's been great to talk to you, but as because I just love what you're doing, and who knows who's listening to this? Somebody usually listens. Hello, everyone. I'm wondering if something may have touched someone specifically with your story or the mission that you're on. Is there anything that I'm a little tempted to ask you kind of what keeps you up at night? And is there anything that you could use help with in the world? Because someone listening may have something that could help you. So as a leader, what are you currently facing?
It's such a great question. And I'm actually really happy that you asked it, because I think one thing with leaders is that when you do you're the owner or founder is this succession of it, like the passing on of it, like knowing that you can't be there forever. Like you've got to bring in new blood. You've got to let people that have expertise beyond you take it to the next level, right?
Yeah.
And be graceful about that. And I think that that's what keeps me up. That's kind of like you've created something so amazing and it's impacting so many lives, but how do you make sure that you pass it off in a way that still holds some of your integrity, but also you're gonna have to let go at one point, right? It's not, there's always that thing about founder syndrome. And for me, it's always been like, it's not because I don't want to let go. It's because I want to make sure that however I transition it is really for the most of the organization and the donors that have been giving to this organization. Like, where do you hold that level of passing on the torch to something that you hope continues for many years to come?
Yeah, that's such an honest answer. Thank you for. I have a hunch that just verbalizing it, that maybe the universe will show you something this week. If someone wants to just reach out to you or learn more about your organization, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Yeah, so our website is the ChandaCenter.org, and so of course our phone number, our email, all that great stuff is on the website. So I encourage people to go to the website, and they can reach out to us at any time.
Chanda, thank you so much. Your spirit comes through the Zoom call, and you're an inspiration to me and so many others I know. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us. And you're part of LeaderCast now. You're in. Thanks for being part of our community.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It was a great time.
Thanks.